So I did a whole video a while ago during Vlogmas on exaltation, fall, and overall debility or dignity in astrology. And I went into some detail in that about like the placements and those planets and signs that were like the best or the worst for each, placement in the zodiac. But I wanted to do a full video on like, I don't mean to say like the best and the worst because it depends on the entire chart, but I want to go in detail as to why some placements are more challenging than others and describe basically like why some things in natal charts suck and why some things in natal charts rock. So I did a short form TikTok on this and it's still in my drafts because there's a little bit of like, I want to have the groundedness to be able to take whatever just like out of context hate I get for it, because I know just the snowflakes will tear it apart. But I want to talk around why some placements are more challenging than others, why some placements are objectively easier and more constructive than others, and not from like a technical sense of like, well, the theory said that this ended up having this coordinate at this point in the zodiac. Just like logistically, why is Mercury in Virgo like objectively like the best fucking placement? Like, let's talk about it. So I'm gonna go through 4 things in this video: exaltation placements, domiciled placements, fallen placements, and antithesis placements. I'm not sure what order I'm gonna do that in yet. I'll think of it as I go, but this is an explanation as to why energetically some planets in certain signs, some placements in natal charts do better than others, and this is pretty objective. The disclaimer though is that we have a bunch of things in our natal chart. So your chart is a combination of many placements. Depending on how you want to count things, there's over 10. Because of the combination of things, we're all dealt a mixed bag. It's not as if the most challenging things in my chart mean that my life is ruined and that it's doomed and that there's nothing good. It also doesn't mean because of some awesome things in my chart, I don't have hardships. So know that when you're watching this video or looking up dignity in astrology, that is one aspect of an entire chart, and it is an immature and overly simplistic view to be like, oh, one thing is really bad, oh, woe is me, my chart's horrible. No, it's always a mixed bag and there's always multiple things going on. With that being said, there are differently mixed bags than others, and if you have more than one on either side of this, it could definitely weigh out to a easier or more challenging life overall. So to start with, we're gonna talk around the planets in, let's do their home signs. So when a planet is in its home sign, it's said to be in its domicile. It's like being at your most comfortable, you're in your house, it is your territory. So when a planet is in its home sign, it is the most comfortable and able to be constructive possible. This is said to be the most positive or constructive placement for any planet to be in its own sign. We'll get into exaltation after this, it's a little bit different, but the most positive, constructive, desirable placement for a planet is to be in its home sign. Now the sun rules Leo, so having the sun in Leo is the most comfortable for it. The sun is our creativity and our ego and our expression. When that is in Leo, the sign of the summer, the sign of self-expression and self-focus and entertainment, it is a natural expression of generosity and upbeat enjoyment and creativity that comes through. And suns in Leo often do have big egos and often really big hearts because there is an emphasis on that creation that works very well. The moon rules Cancer, and because the moon is the emotional nature, Cancer allows for a very well protective but still guided moodiness that the moon works well in. Because if the moon is the emotional tides, Cancer is quite a moody, fickle sign in terms of what it goes through, but it always kind of returns to this baseline of comfort and care and wanting to be cozy. So the moon feels very at home in Cancer. Mercury is at home in Virgo. Mercury rules Virgo. It's a planet of communication and intellect. And Virgo, being such a discriminating, critical sign, offers a very delicately eloquent and particular lens for Mercury. That means that Mercury in Virgo tends to be a very strong communicator, very good at being concise, straight to the point, and just great with words and communication. Venus is at home in 2 signs, we can go back to Virgo. Virgo is also at home in Gemini. So Mercury in Gemini is, but it's better in Virgo, which I'll get into in a little bit, but I'll get into it now. Mercury is both at home and exalted in Virgo. It is the only sign, Mercury is the only planet that is both in its home sign and exalted in the same sign. So we'll get into Mercury exalted in Virgo in a bit, but Mercury is also at home in Gemini. Do not eat my camera cat. Mercury is also at home in Gemini, and Mercury in Gemini is much more of a brainstorming yang kind of placement. It talks a lot more, and it has a lot more ideas out there. So because I need to move my cat, 1 second. Cat, no, Iris, you need to, okay, she's getting off. You cannot be on the camera. So Mercury in Gemini is a much more overtly brainstormy, throwing shit at the wall, talkative energy. It's definitely much more upbeat and much more all over the place. But Mercury in Gemini is still desirable because Mercury in Gemini people often just come up with so many ideas and are so mentally fast that it is a very well functioning Mercury. So similarly, Venus is at home in 2 signs. Firstly, Taurus. So Venus is aesthetics, values, it is love, nature, and Taurus is like quality over quantity, high caliber, enjoyment of the luxury, old money aesthetic. Venus in Taurus is just like, give me all the things, give me all the very high quality things, you know, the best of the best, but also very loyal and dependable. So Venus loves being very just like luxurious in Taurus. Venus in Libra is a little more social and a little more upbeat because Venus in Libra is around the harmony between people. And Venus in Libra works very well with personal styling. I find that people with Venus in Libra are great at personal styling in terms of like trends and just putting things together in a really trendy way. And then Venus in Libra also is a lot of focus on social harmony and the bonds between social people, and it's a very positive placement for that to weigh out all the different options of how to minimize conflict in social situations. So it's very comfortable there. Mars, planet of action and aggression and how to get shit done, is at home in Aries and Scorpio. So it's at home in Aries. Mars rules Aries because it's the go-getter. It is the impulsive, courageous, do not think twice, just do, very, very heroic placement. It does very well there. And Mars in Scorpio is a little bit more careful and strategic, and it's definitely very much a private investigator, like stalker in a like strong way. I'm not saying these are good or bad in terms of the person, but it functions very well. Mars in Scorpio is very much like learn everything about you, choose how to take you down kind of thing, and is very good at doing basically like the most to find things out. It's very, very critical and very, very strategic. Now Jupiter is at home in Sagittarius and Pisces. So Jupiter is the planet of expansion and growth, and Pisces is, we'll start with Pisces. Pisces is about faith and is about, the boundlessness of love and unconditional nature of caring and loving people. So Jupiter there is like, I will learn, I will go all over the world, I will care about anything, and there's no limit. There's no bounds to Jupiter's generosity when it's in Pisces. It's incredibly, and I have Jupiter in Pisces, it's incredibly passionate about growing at all costs in a very loving way. Jupiter in Sagittarius is a little bit more about the exuberance or the exploration of life and having fun along the journey and really wanting to live it up and hype things up. And Jupiter in Sagittarius is all around like, I will go out and do that thing. I'll be an adrenaline junkie because that's what life is for. And it's a little less around the unconditional love and more around the unconditional exploration and expansion and having, a spirit of adventure and enthusiasm. Now, Saturn is at home in Capricorn and Aquarius. So Saturn is the planet of boundaries, and Capricorn is a planet where Saturn and Capricorn is very strategic, it's all around keeping things safe. So I like to make the comparison that if Saturn is boundaries, Saturn and Capricorn is top-down boundaries of keeping things safe, of keeping things in, of guarding, of being very fear-based, very careful, very cautious, and having very, very firm walls around things. Versus Saturn in Aquarius, which is the air sign and is the yang, is more around bottom-up boundaries of like, this is the structure that will allow for building. This is the structure that will allow for growth. So Saturn in either Capricorn or Aquarius is the best placement, strategically speaking for it. And then all the other planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, are not ruling any signs in traditional astrology. So I still believe that, and I do not believe that Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto rule any signs. Therefore, there's no sign that they are necessarily at home in. So to recap, planets in their home signs are the strongest, most constructive, and most calmly functional in a chart. The other really positive placement is planets that are exalted. So exaltation represents when a planet is royally lifted up in a combination with that sign to be very impressive and very, like, it has the audacity to be very, very impressive is the way I would say it. There's not really a downside to this, but I will say that exalted planets can piss other people off because they tend to be very over the top and very like, wow, you're so good at that. Versus when they're in their home sign, it's kind of like, yeah, they're good at that and that's their thing and that's what they've always, done. It's comfortable. Exalted planets can be like, wow, like you're amazing at that. And they can be a little bit in over their heads, but that's not a downside whatsoever. There is not a downside to an exalted planet. People might try to make it up and be like, they're over, like, no. There's not an inherent downside to an exalted planet. There's just not. But there can be downsides to other things in the chart, which, color it. So, let's start out with the sun. The sun is exalted in Aries. So the sun is exalted in Aries because of the sun is our ego and our creativity. Aries doesn't think twice and it allows it to be extremely direct and extremely proud of itself in the way that it acts very impulsively and very go. It allows the ego to function very well. The moon is exalted in Taurus, and I think this one makes a lot of sense. Taurus is very stable, it's very grounded, it is a fixed earth sign. If the moon, which is our emotional nature, needs a safe home, Taurus is the most stable energy for the moon's emotional nature to be in. Taurus moons tend to be a little more optimistic and stable than a lot of other moon signs, and Taurus moons tend to roll with the punches without a lot of emotional volatility. Now, Mercury is exalted in Virgo, as I brought up earlier, because there is no other sign that is as well suited for Mercury than Virgo. It is both at home there and very comfortable because it rules it, but also it stands out there because it's concise, it's witty, it's fast, but it's not egregious or over the top. It's still humble with the way it communicates. Venus is exalted in Pisces because if Venus is our love nature and our values, Pisces loves everyone, everything, and has no conditions, but it also isn't going to be wanting something in return. In fact, Pisces can be a bit of a martyr, but with Venus and it being often a passive thing, Venus and Pisces is it's a very positive combination of Venus's passive feminine ability to appreciate and to be receptive and creative, and Pisces having no preconceived boundaries or conditions. Mars is exalted in Capricorn because if Mars is this militaristic, very strategic, go-getter energy, Capricorn allows there to be a bit of a ladder for Mars to climb instead of being violent or aggressive in a very over-the-top way. So Mars in Capricorn does very well because it's strategic, it is extremely smart at overall plans, and puts its effort towards often like climbing a social or a corporate ladder in a way that's pretty impressive. Now, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer because Jupiter in Cancer, similar to Venus in Pisces, is unconditional in the spread of its good nature, but Cancer is a little bit more protected and a little bit more intentional with where it puts its growth. So Jupiter in Cancer is great because it's like, I have no bounds to the protection that I provide for what I care about. Guiding people, caring about people, I will provide that all day and be an inspiration to people with the ability to hold space for their personal growth. Saturn is exalted in Libra because Libra is always thinking about social connections and weighing out options of conflict. And Saturn in Libra tends to be fair and judicial at all costs. It is a great placement for having a very level head at weighing out things in a court-like way and not getting attached to fear-based boundaries either. And the other planets, like I said, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, because they are not ruling any signs, I also do not ascribe any exaltations. There's some astrologers that will disagree with me, and their points are actually valid here, I think, because just because planets don't rule signs doesn't mean there can't be exaltations. I, however, do not find it convincing at this point in my practice that any planets, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto are exalted in any sign, so I don't ascribe to that. So now for the challenging ones. So when a planet is opposite to the sign that it rules, it is said to be in its antithesis or its exile. It's kind of like being in a foreign country. If you were as far away from possible on the other side of the world from where you're from, it's not a bad thing, but it can definitely be an uncomfortable thing. So being in its antithesis means that a planet is not necessarily suffering, but is in a weird paradox of feeling like an alien. So it is more challenging than normal, but it is not bad or anything that I would be scared of in the same degree of having a fallen planet where it's objectively rough. Antithesis planets are just weird and in a paradox of a little bit being out of their comfort zone. So the sun is in its antithesis in Aquarius because it rules the opposite sign of Leo. The sun in Aquarius is weird because if the sun is our ego and our creativity, Aquarius is about the collective and the larger worldview. It's kind of like finding yourself and how you relate to the collective, which makes Aquariuses often base their identity on being nonconformist or weird or just different. So it's a weird manifestation of your ego being dependent on how different you are than other people often enough. The moon is in its antithesis in Capricorn because if the moon is our emotional softness, it's weird for it to be in a sign about strategy, about pulling up, your own, doing your own thing in life, around being very tough. And moon in Capricorn can often show that our emotional nature is to toughen up and kind of solidify through things rather than move through the waves. Mercury is in its exile in both Sagittarius and Pisces. So in Sagittarius, it's difficult because Mercury is around precision, and Sagittarius is such a philosophical, adventurous sign that trying to communicate everything in Sagittarius through Mercury is trying to fit a black hole in like a paperclip. There's so much there, so Mercury and Sag can be very wordy and very nebulous. Mercury in Pisces is quite challenging because Pisces is the most nebulous, the most dreamy, the most faith-based abstract sign. Mercury there is like interpretive dance and speaking in tongues. It's a challenging combination because it's also in its fall, as we will get into. Venus is in its exile in Scorpio and in Aries. It's in its exile in Scorpio because Venus wants harmony and love. Scorpio wants intensity and like on the deathbed together. So it's a quite dark, quite intense placement for Venus that can be more obsessive than is normally healthy. Venus in Aries is in its exile because Venus is around cohesion and togetherness and unity. Venus in Aries wants love through independence and love through very fast-paced, very immediate actions. So it's quite more jarring or more sharp than the average Venus. Mars is in its exile in Libra and in Taurus because Mars in Libra is trying to work through conflict in the least conflict-ridden way. It's trying to solve problems by finding unity. So it's quite a passive, quite a let's solve this in a very like sit down, talk it out way. It tends to be very passive-aggressive and very non-confrontational. Mars in Taurus is very slow. Slow and steady wins the race. It is also very much around avoidance or around not solving issues directly, but rather kind of going aside. Because Mars and Taurus at all costs, it's the dullest knife in the fucking. It's so dull. Like in terms of the knife, there's not a sharpness. It's very dull, very slow. It's not bad though. It's not challenging in the same way being its fall is. Jupiter is in its exile in Gemini and in Virgo. Jupiter wants growth and expansion, and in Gemini, it can be very obsessed with details in a way that's kind of like manic circularity of difficulty and getting it head out of its own ass. Jupiter in Virgo can be challenging because it fixates on the criticisms and it grows criticism or it grows nitpickiness in a way that can be great, but also like missing the forest for the trees. And Saturn is in its exile in Cancer and Leo. Saturn in Cancer is hard because it's like drawing emotional boundaries or trying to keep a really thick emotional guard up, and it feels a little bit out of place. It's like, how do we build a house underwater? Like if we're all up in our feelings, how do we draw boundaries around all this shit? And then Saturn in Leo is in its exile because Saturn is super serious and super like boundary-ish, and Leo is the opposite. It is playfulness, it's creativity, it's exuberance. So Saturn in Leo tends to be weird because it's like you're drawing boundaries on your ego. You're very aesthetic, you're very monk-like. You are preventing yourself from like self-expression in some ways. Now, the most challenging placement possible in this way is to have a planet in its fall, which is the opposite of its exaltation. Planets in their fall are notably at a disadvantage or lower starting point with that resource in life than is ideal. This is objectively the most challenging planet and sign combination possible, and it doesn't mean you're doomed, but it shows a definite disadvantage in that area of life that you have to work through. So with the sun, it is in its fall in Libra because the sun wants to be individuated and Libra sees itself in someone else. So sun in Libra has a hard time seeing itself as its own entity and creating of its own merit without bouncing off of other people, which can be inefficient. The moon is in its fall when it's in Scorpio, because if the moon wants emotional stability and comfort, Scorpio is the sign of volatility and very chaotic ups and downs in a way that is a lot for the moon, little like moon, to go through these ups and downs and these like very polarizing feelings. Mercury is in its fall in Pisces, where it is also exiled, because it's not just out of place in Pisces, but it has a notable difficulty communicating in such an abstract lens of faith and nonverbal, nonlinear, weird shit. So it's more challenging to communicate in a very concise, linear way. Venus is in its fall when it is in Virgo, because Venus wants unity and harmony, and Virgo is nitpicky, critical, detail-oriented, and can mean that the nature of finding harmony is through picking everything wrong out, which never really ends. So it tends to be a very, very critical kind of combination. Mars is in its fall in Cancer, because if Mars wants to get things through and cut through issues and climb to the top, Cancer is going to get caught up in the feelings here, and it's not aligned for me, and I don't feel comfortable with this. It can be very circular and very non-confrontational, like Mars and Libra, but very circular and very emotional in its actions and very temperamental. So it can be difficult to do clear actions with Mars and Cancer. Jupiter is in its fall in Capricorn, because Jupiter wants to expand and grow in a happy way. Capricorn is the most fear-oriented, closed-in sign. So it's almost like growing through hardships or growing through ways that are really, really the hardest way. It's like growing through the grit. And then Saturn is in its fall when it is in Aries, because Saturn wants to have boundaries around things that are, judicial, and we can work this out. Saturn in Aries is like, your personality needs to get its shit together. You need to grow up. You need to put boundaries around your ego, your creativity. Your actions need a lot of restraint. With Mars is in Aries, it tends to show like you need some kind of a filter around your actions. There's that lesson there. So like I said, if you have one planet exalted or one planet fallen, okay, that's a definite plus or minus in your chart for that energy. However, we're all a combination of things, and this will be mitigated by house placement and aspect. If you have an exalted planet, for example, in the 12th, that is challenging. Not because it's exalted, because it's in the 12th. The exaltation's great, whatever. But if a planet is in the 12th house, there are other things. So there are other things that can mitigate this. And if you feel that this planet that you have, either exalted, fallen, in its home or not, doesn't feel as energetically extreme, you probably have a mitigation of an aspect that's positive or challenging. So there are nuances, but all in all, this is a great start. So let me know in the comments below if you have any of these. I only have Jupiter and Pisces. I don't have any exalted or any fallen planets, so I'm pretty mediocre. But I'll be interested in hearing what you guys have, and let me know in the next one.